Hello, class. In this video, I just have a demonstration PowerPoint presentation, and I want to go over it and just point out basic PowerPoint or presentation rules that I set up to use it. I'll go over the content of the lecture a little bit just to keep us going, but really I'm going to talk more about the slides themselves and how it was set up and whatnot. And this presentation is meant to really follow another video that I posted that was just the basic rules of PowerPoint presentation. So if you watch that video, you have the basic rules. Here's sort of it a little bit more in practice in an actual presentation. So one of the rules I say is the first thing you should have is a title slide that sort of has the title of your whole presentation, sort of nice graphic image. So here is this because again, what happens is you often sit on your title slide for a fairly long time. Now, what I should have on this slide that I don't is my own name. And so that was a mistake on my part. Again, I actually made this presentation a while ago now. And so, I'm learning these things too. So this presentation is certainly not perfect in any way. I don't think any presentation is. So there's the first mistake there is I don't have my name. But here it is, Climate Change, Sustainability, and the Future of Architecture. I think it's an interesting lecture. If you might end up reading the slides on your own more than I'll explain them here. Um, since we'll be talking more about how this PowerPoint is designed more than anything. So after you, there we go. Okay, after your title, you want to introduce your concept. So I just have a couple slides on this. The first thing is, what's the big problem? Ultimately, introduce the big problem for my introduction, talk about it for the most of my work, and then have my conclusion at the end, my bold conclusion at the end. But here's the introduction. Hopefully, you guys know a bit about climate change. If you don't, I'd love to go into it more at another time. But essentially, this is basically saying we have an issue. It's climate change caused by fossil fuels. Again, I'm not here to present the content of this lecture fully. Then we get into sort of the body of the presentation, which is a long build-up. I recommend approximately less than 20 slides. I should have checked what the slide count was on this. I'm not sure, but we'll have to go into here. But you can see there's environmental issues dealing with climate change, from floods and droughts and sea level rise and storms and all of these things. And some of those things impact humans. So you don't have water, you might have difficulty drinking or farming or whatever the case might be. So again, if you want to read all that more closely, you can. From a PowerPoint presentation standpoint, I would argue I was trying to keep the slide count down, and I don't want to focus too much on the negativities in this presentation because it's meant to be about the positivities of what can happen. Arguably, I could have put this in two slides, environmental issues and human issues, because there's a lot of bullet points on this slide to go over. Um, so then we have, okay, well, if the issue is carbon emissions, where do carbon emissions come from? Now, these statistics, again, are a bit old because this presentation is from several years back. And of course, that data was from a few years before that because that's how data works. But, we're architects. So in orange, I have buildings. That clearly is something that architects can deal with. But I have a little bit of animation on this slide, and just a little bit. And again, I'm only using it to help tell the story because the reality is, at least at the time of this writing, 70% of US industry is for construction material. So that means things as an architect like myself, I can sort of put that in the orange category if I wanted to. As an architect, and designer, I have some control over that. And then the reality is, and 59% of the transportation budget is from gasoline, which means individual transportation, not planes or trains or any of those other kinds of transportation methods. And the fact is that a lot of the way we use transportation is highly tied to how we build buildings and where we build buildings. So as an architect, and especially as an urban designer, which I also am, um, I have control over that. So when you really look at this slide, architects have a lot of they have the ability to contribute to a lot of the carbon problem in the United States, right? And they can sort of go and make things better, as we'll see if they work towards it. So, but for the slide, I used a little bit of animation to bring home that point that architects can have a lot of say on the pie chart of carbon emissions in the United States. I think the big question is, can we reverse the trend? Um, you know, so on and so forth. You can see some data here. I'm not going to go over it all. You can see it here. I'm just going to move on. That's sort of a boring slide, but it's got the right number of bullet points and so on and so forth. And here I got the good news, or what I like to think. We used to have, when I was a kid, one of the big issues that everyone talked about is the hole in the ozone, which is not, sometimes people get that environmental issue related with global climate change. They're actually different issues. They're caused by different things, although there's obviously similarities between them as well. But they are fundamentally different things. And the good news is, the hole in the ozone has actually started to close. Um, so in 2014, I think was the first year that it's reported. It's slow. I think 1 or 2 years since then it has opened slightly, gotten bigger, but we're making progress towards it. And that all came from this, 1987 protocol. So I like to think, if we could solve that problem, perhaps we can solve the climate change one too. Granted, climate change is a much bigger issue than the hole in the ozone, but I think it's good news. So again, from a slide perspective, 3 bullet points, it's perfect, an image of the hole in the ozone. And if I was talking about the slide, I could go on and on about these issues, and I'm not going to for this point, but I could mostly be speaking the words here. So again, the point here on this one was architects don't have to wait because we have so much to say. We don't control, that was a bad word to use, but because architects are involved with buildings and building materials, which is industry, and how people drive from building to building, we could actually make an impact. We don't have to wait for governments or treaties or anything else. Let's just start making good decisions. So that really is sort of a word. It's not a drawing, it's a word, but I put images along the bottom to support, like solar panels, green roofs, solar daylighting, small buildings, recycled building content, which is the one there on the bottom right. So that's the good news. And then I presented this to students, so I like to ask this question, and you'll probably end up getting this question again from me when we're talking. So I'm gonna sort of ruin it for anyone who gets to see it. So I'm gonna just jump ahead. I think this can be interesting, but the answer is actually to what is the most sustainable location in the United States is Manhattan. So notice here, one of my rules of thumb is like let the title do the work for slides. So all this slide is this title, and then as I let people answer, which is why I had the white screen at first, but then afterwards, if they're not getting it, I'll put the image up, and then obviously most people can get what it is. And I'm not going to fully go into the reason why it's Manhattan in this presentation. Again, that's for another lecture and another time, but essentially it comes down to efficiency. People are using less fossil fuels because they have smaller homes and whatnot and drive less when they live in big cities. And so since New York City is the biggest city in the United States, people are often the most efficient there, at least for global climate change. That's not to say there aren't other issues. There certainly are. Um, so again, here it is. This is just some research I did. I'm just showing some examples. Simple solution, it's density. For an architect, the more we can build more densely, there is definitely benefits there. Again, I'm not going to go into all the content of why that is. And then another fun question. Um, if everyone lived in a row house, how much land would be required to house the entire population of Earth? Little animation to drive home the point. Texas. Again, this doesn't include other things people need. It only includes houses. But if everyone lived in a row house, think of how much we could do with the rest of the Earth. It'd be quite amazing. Um, you know, so there's lots of efficiency to squeeze out. That's the point there. So then I just have a series of slides. This is really the heart of my presentation. Okay, hopefully I've convinced you that global climate change is an issue, and hopefully I've convinced you that architects can go out of their way to help make the environment better. Now here are the ways of you actually do this in case you don't know. Just build smaller. You build smaller, you use less material. You use less energy to heat and cool the space because there's less air inside the building. Again, just simplifying that discussion for now. If I were really giving this presentation, I need no bullet points. I could have put some bullet points for those things on here, but I didn't. I just have one big picture of a tiny house, and I can just go on and on and on about those issues, and people can look at this nice, interesting piece of architecture. Rain screens versus continuing insulation. It's how you insulate the building can go a long way. Again, I'm not going to go over these technical details at all for this presentation. That will be for another time. You can always ask me about it on the side, but some graphics, just a couple bullet points, and I would go on and on about this presentation. There's a little animated detail to blow up. And then I think the big point that I also like to talk about, so we're sort of starting to reach the end of this presentation, which was meant to be short. Um, Again, you don't want many slides in your presentation. I would have talked a lot more about each slide, so if I was giving this presentation, it would have been longer. Um, but a full bullet points to start the conclusion, start working my way to the big idea, the big story I'm trying to tell, and that is when you use rain screens, which we talked about on the previous slide, and what those are, which is a way of building, it's a building technology. Um, it has some real advantages. Not only does it have the sustainability advantage that this presentation is about, but it's got some real design advantages and construction advantages. Um, it works in any material, at any scale, any shape, and all these things. Most materials and wall systems are not that flexible, nor are they that environmentally friendly or sustainable. This is a unique thing. And ultimately, it's going to generate a new design paradigm, which is the take home point. And it's going to produce more interesting buildings. So again, I would go into much more detail about why I think this produces much more buildings if you build sustainably and if you build with this concept of rain screen. But basically, it is a new design paradigm because rain screens, the modern movement, it was about expression of simple form. Don't add decoration to building, express your structure. The problem is when you're building sustainably and when you're building with rain screens, which is a sustainable technology, you are adding decoration. Essentially, the exterior facade is just a decoration because you have to conceal all the insulation you put on the building, and the insulation conceals all the structure of the building. So it's a different way of building. It's the way that we need to meet our times. It's not the way I was trained in, and I always say it's like you students are the one that's going to go out and really change the world with this. You're going to come up with the great ideas. I mean, people are doing such fascinating stuff because they have broken free. It's the first time in history, really, where the exterior material is really free of the structure of the building. And that's a whole new world. So from sustainability and saving the world, we can be artistic and expressive and lead the world into a new a better future. So that's sort of my big conclusion. I spent a little time on there. I would have spent a little, to express myself because an important part of a presentation is having a big idea and leading up to it and telling that story, and concluding it in that way. So I want to spend a little time there. Again, I probably would have spoken a little bit more to it if I was formally giving this presentation. And then, of course, the last slide in all of this is the slide that is oh so important that students often forget in verbal presentations or even when they make a PowerPoint presentation like this. Just have a last slide, a little bit of graphic, and it says something like "Thank you," or "Do you have any questions?" or things like that. That allows people to know that the presentation has ended, gives them opportunity to speak. And then, as some discussion happens and moves forward, they may say, "Hey, can you go back to whatever slide?" And you might have to jump back and like, "Oh yeah, look at this detail. What I meant here was this, that, and this is how the water works, and so on and so forth." Or like, "Oh, I really like that house. So blah 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 blah. And I didn't design this house. I just found it and I liked it, so I put it in the presentation." It'd say that, so you can move back and forth along there. Because again, the biggest problem about PowerPoint presentations is often that they are sort of very linearly and it's hard to capture it all in at the same time. But this makes it clearly I've ended it. Now let's go and sort of take a look and answer questions and go back to anywhere as we need to try to get a sense of holism into this presentation. So there's an example presentation that is not perfect, but I think is a good example. I made my own template. I should mention that the green bar across the top with the title that happens on every slide. It's consistent that way. The fonts are consistent, but it's simple and try to let the drawings read. And if I were giving this, I would speak a lot more because have mainly images, speak most of your words. You do that, you have a clear, consistent uh, story to tell. You tell that story and have a strong conclusion, and you'll do fine with your presentation. So, good luck and have fun making your presentations. I look forward to seeing them.